Welcome back, everybody. I want to give the floor to Arjen Lentz, who is going to tell us all about his crystal ball for vulnerability security. Let's give him a hand.
Okay, goedemorgen. I do speak Dutch. I'm from Amsterdam originally, but I've lived in Australia for the last 26 years. I should turn my microphone on. That would be a great idea. There, now the recording is happier. Okay, I have lived in Australia for the last 26 years. The last time I spoke at NLUUG Spring Conference, or any NLUUG conference, was a whole 23 years ago. And I worked back then, I worked for a little company called MySQL. I don't know, who was there in 2003? That's pretty good, that's pretty good. Yeah, so earlier today I actually wore the 2003 shirt. A white shirt with a World Wide Web spider and a lot of very, very obsolete terms. Like Zopi and, you know, like what? So yeah, so it's very cool to be back here again. That's lovely, and thanks to NLUUG because they actually paid for my plane ticket here, and yes, very sneaky, and the route was a bit interesting. No Middle East for me. It actually went 3 flights, 2 hops via China. So why not? Very nice airline actually, China Southern. So that was pretty good. As a consequence, I didn't take any electronics with me, just because of the work, you know. So this is a borrowed laptop, and yeah, that kind of stuff. Okay. Anyway, what we're doing today with some extra paraphernalia, just, you know, to keep it extra fun. Here's my crystal ball. It actually works. You can play with it later. Oh, those things are just lovely fun. I bought this one in Holland because they can break. And a jacket I borrowed from my nephew. It's been on stage for a performance of Tijl Uilenspiegel. This is Tijl's jacket. Serious stuff. Okay, we're going to be talking about vulnerability prediction. And that's why I need my crystal ball. We need that. You may have read the abstract of the talk, which was written in arcane English. I'm not going to bother with that right now because we want to get through the talk at a fairly high speed, and I can't do that at high speed. I can manufacture it, but not that quickly. Okay, who in the room is not familiar with CVEs? That's a very low percentage, approximately 0. And the people on the video have by now been able to read this and may have stopped the slide, so that's good. We can continue. Okay, my scrolls are as follows. I grabbed all the CVEs from 2020, 1st of January onwards up to early April, and I grabbed things that got a CVSS score 5 or up, and network accessible, 0 user input, and so on. And as a result, you get about 3,000. But that was from over 200,000, so there's a fair amount of filtering going on. So, of course, that's not everything that's really bad, but it gives us a nice selection that is definitely bad because it doesn't require any user intervention and it's accessible over the network. So, you know, we can agree that it's not good. The really, really bad thing is that 29,500 of those are actually older than a year. So at the time that they were published, as in CVE fixed, or at least mitigated in some form, they were more than a year old at that time. They had been reported more than a year before that time. So they had been out in the wild, but the idea is that they hadn't been exploited. This is what I call my vector broth, also known as a little cloud. And yeah, so the biggest ones are obviously the things that are the most used, and that's actually what I saw all the time. Authentication is a big one, validation, input validation, injection of all varieties are really, really big. APIs are a very hot topic. Yeah, command injection, obviously, arbitrary. Arbitrary is a keyword, it picks up separately. You know, arbitrary execution of commands and remote code execution and things like that. So yes, it's a nice mix. Oh, and right at the top, it's always DNS, right? Yeah, so it's there. And session management, yeah, specific remote code execution is there. RPC never fails to show up. Improper usually relates to improper checking of something. I have to split up those keywords because otherwise it doesn't always detect them. I'll explain later how I did that. So here, there's a bit of arcane still in here. When I talk about merchants, those are actually the vendors. But you know, they're no different from the merchants that you would see on the market, the town squares and the marketplaces of old. They're still purveying their snake oil. So, yes, these are, unfortunately, the chief culprits. These peeps come up with most of the CVEs. And some do better at some time, and some do worse at other times. Now, what I found interesting on the left is that one of our favorites to whinge about is Fortinet, but in terms of number of problems in the same space, in terms of switches and routers and firewalls, Juniper actually is worse by about a third. And we don't whinge about Juniper that much. So, you know, maybe we should adjust our narrative. Of course, both have their issues, and we'll look at them more later. F5 we know about. Big IP has lots of things ongoing. And then there's kind of like another set just below these who have fewer than 5 issues per month. So I've kind of averaged, I've averaged that between 2020 and now. So it's not quite even, but we'll see more graphs later about this. In home routers, D-Link and TP-Link are not pretty. And you can see there's a slight difference between them, but it's, you know, meh. Just don't. Yeah. I'm not holding back on nasties here. It's not worthwhile, and I'll explain why. I'll also mention that this talk hasn't been accepted at any Australian security conference because they don't like this kind of stuff. Luckily, in the Netherlands, we're not so fussy and actually say it like it is. So, yes, snake oil. So, might a vendor publish more CVEs because they're catching up on all the CVEs? It actually happens, and you can tell in the graph, but in general, they tend not to. Generally speaking, when vendors are catching up on older CVEs, they, well, when it's on older CVEs, you can tell in the graph. If it's about issues they have discovered themselves, they tend to not file their own CVE and then fix it, because that makes them look bad in statistics like this and similar statistics to, there's another talk about CVEs later today. that blips the scales in terms of totals of CVEs, and that doesn't look good for the vendor. So, so we can presume that a CVE is something that has been reported by a member of the public, not the vendor itself. And a very important thing to remember, of course, is that a malicious actor will not be reporting the CVE. They will weaponize it and use it against us. So what we're looking at is probably a reasonable reflection of what is actually going on. If you disagree, feel free to talk to me afterwards. I'm intending to use this for more things, and it'll be fun to fine-tune that and fix anything that is really, really wrong. So I was mentioning Fortinet earlier, and this is what Fortinet has been up to. First of all, on the right, a pie of what components in Fortinet the CVEs can be allocated to. Again, that takes a little bit of data wrangling, but we can usually derive where it belongs. So most of it obviously is FortiOS, because most of their stuff runs FortiOS, so that's not unusual. And then FortiClient is the next biggest one, because you run that on your desktop to connect to the VPN endpoint, or something like that. So those are, in this case, fairly easy to catch. The next biggest one might be FortiProxy, all of that. Okay, it's a bit variable, as you can tell. It goes ups and downs. However, the trend is upward, and I find that rather worrying. And the other thing is that the average age of the vulnerability, that's the blue line, actually is also moving upward. And that I find really worrying. So that means that the rate of fixing is slowing down. So when something gets reported, it takes more months for Fortinet to actually issue a fix for it. And I don't know what the cause is of that. Fortinet may want to communicate about that. But I think it's a worry. The only reason they can possibly get away with that is because there may be no active exploits in the wild. But, you never know what happens that we don't detect. Usually, there's people who track that kind of thing. If they see funny stuff being exploited, they catch that things are out in the wild, but not always. So we have to get lucky. So yeah, I'm afraid they are deteriorating, and the age of fixed issues is rising. So they still need to be careful. Here's another example. Of course, we need to look at Microsoft. Again, they're very variable, and they've actually been doing really well. Like between 2020 and 2021, they actually were playing catch up, and they were doing really great. So, close to 90 in the year 2020 for that set. They went down to almost nothing, and then it blipped again in 2023 and so on. They are pretty quick in fixing things. I'm misreading it now. But in any case, the number, so that was the average age, sorry. So it's from about half a year downwards to almost nothing, and now it's blipped again at a month. That was the blue line, sorry. And the year published, that's now going up again. And Satya Nadella promised improvements, otherwise he'd hand in some of his salary, which is still atrocious, but he promised he'd hand in some. And then you can see it drops a little bit. That's great. But I plotted it out per quarter, and then we see that. because then I have the first quarter of 2026 as well. I can't plot that out for the year, of course, but it's rising sharply for the first quarter, so that's January to March. So they've lost it again. It's a continuing saga, and that's very, very unfortunate. The majority of the issues is in Windows, and that I sometimes can't distinguish between Windows Desktop and Windows Server. So, and sometimes it also doesn't matter. It might be the same code, so just Windows. The second biggest chunk is Azure. They have a lot of security issues there, which I find a real worry because AWS and Oracle Cloud and the others have way fewer. And Azure is not as big as AWS. So, what do you know? Anyway, and of course, Exchange Server is also still in there. Anybody still using Exchange Server just shouldn't. It's not a safe place to be. By the time you can send it an email which compromises the server and you can do remote code execution, it's time to move away. And that was one of the more recent ones in the last 5 years. So, yeah. Anyway, okay. This gives you a bit of an overview. I've got a number of more slides like that. I have them past the end of the presentation. We'll see how we go for time. I'm also happy to put my laptop up on one of the tables outside and show you some stuff. I have all of the vendors from the left-hand side of the earlier diagram. I've got them plotted out. So you can just ask me, okay, show me what the ratio was per year and what their average age of the issues was, and then that might answer some of your questions. Okay, so let's look at the dark side of this and how we can make use on the evil end of town, how we can make use of this information. And you know, I'm not naive. I'm not more clever than many, many other people. And, you know, I'm quite old. I may have blue hair now. It was supposed to be green, by the way, but, you know, bleach does funny things. The last iteration with the same hair color ended up green, and this one ended up blue. So it happens. It's okay. So blue team, it's all good. Yeah, so there's plenty of very young malicious actors who are either highly motivated because, you know, as teenagers we muck around in the middle of the night. Well, let's put it this way. How many of us have the heritage of having mucked around in the middle of the night? Yeah, we know how it is. It's cool, right? That's our heritage. So, yeah, they also think it's cool. And the other thing is there's a lot of money in it. You can earn a heck of a lot of money. And if you're a nation state, you already start with lots of money. And if you throw that at these people, they get a heck of a lot of resources available, extra computing power, so they can do a lot. And that makes them very dangerous. So organizations are all very exposed to this. You can't just say, oh, my organization is perfectly safe, because there's no such thing. So earlier, we already saw a couple of things that are visible, things that you can derive from the NVD database, which is the CVEs. Now, history teaches us that things usually get discovered in multiple places at the same time. Apparently, and I forget the names and locations, but apparently Marconi wasn't the first with the radio. And I happen to know that there were some people in New Zealand who actually flew a plane several months before the Wright brothers. However, as is often the case, some get more publicity than others, and that's what happens. But things get discovered at the same time in different places. That's just a fact. And these days, with the world being so connected, if someone discovers something on the other end of the planet, we are vulnerable. And that's the way things are now with the connected internet. And I love the internet, but it causes some problems, and it also makes sure that we have work, right? So again, a malicious actor will not be reporting CVE, they will weaponize it. And that is, that's interesting, but not healthy for us. It does keep me in a job. So are the vendors of the various products that I touched on earlier, and many, many more, are they doing enough? And I don't think they are, and that's why I'm kind of using this talk to raise that issue and not being too kind about any of them, because I don't think they are doing enough. And I have a lot of respect for the developers, some of whom are in the room here, and you know, they do great work, and that includes people at Microsoft. I have chatted with developers at Microsoft. They're great people. But when it comes to marketing people, sales people, and various layers of management, these companies are total crap. And that is where the problems arise. And I think we have the right, a duty to actually call that out, because we are the technologists who recognize these problems where business people might not. And so, you know, we have the opportunity to call it out, and we can talk to them and the press and other people in business terms, as in, this is really, really bad. This is bad for your business, this is bad for national security, and just in general terms, it's not good. So, yes, so let's play that game. Weasel words. Who has encountered things like this and thinks this is really familiar? Yeah, that. So that's sometimes how a bathroom is advertised. And exactly the same happens when either a product is advertised or there's a press release about what vulnerabilities have been fixed in a particular product, how much improvement has been applied by the vendor into their products. They contain weasel words. And, you know, it appears to say something, but if you read between the lines, it's actually not that, because in this case, you know, functional bathroom. Yes, okay, technically it's a bathroom, it has a tap and a drain, but anything in between you can't quite be certain of. There's no photo. You may not even have to go and look to see what kind of a wreck it is. I mentioned there, if I remember correctly, that, you know, it's somewhere between needs a serious renovation to being completely ripped out, start again, kind of thing. You know, it's really not good. So you read between the lines and you can actually tell what's going on, and it might depend a bit on your familiarity with the language. I'm very familiar with English. It is I often say it's my second first language because my mother was raised in England. And so I have a really easy time of reading English and actually catching subtleties that native English speakers might put in that someone who is not natively English might not catch. But nevertheless, those things are in there, and I think it's a good thing to share these insights. Now I'm going to be naming specific names, very specific. This one is a very good example. It's very interesting. Didn't result in CVEs because it was a bit too big for that, but it blew up around the planet. It was an out of bounds array read that did it. There were 21 entries in a 20 item array, and of course that says boom because things are protected, particularly when you're in kernel space. In this case on Windows, but you could do the same thing on Linux and cause trouble. CrowdStrike doesn't do regular kernel space on Linux. It uses, what is it, BGP? EVB, EPB, say it again? eBPF, that is correct. That's the one I mean. Okay, anyway, so they're not running completely loose, and that is a good thing. Yeah, so then in their root cause analysis, and you can see the link at the top there, and you can easily find it online, they say a lot of things, and to their credit, they're actually pretty open about it, so that's good. They are addressing a lot of things. So is that all fantastic? Well, we'll see in a moment how fantastic that really is. And they also said they were going to have 2 code reviews done by external parties. Sounds fantastic, so, you know, let's have a look at that. And yet, read between the lines. All those things they were mentioning in their report, they were fixing the exact issue that caused the blow-up. They were not dealing with the broader issues in the software. So if the same issue of an out-of-bounds read could happen there in the software, they weren't fixing it. They were just fixing it right here because it blew up. Well, that's great. That exact same problem won't happen again, but it could happen anywhere else because they haven't fundamentally solved it. And that is a serious concern. And that is a very common theme with vendors and their fixes, and we can tell. I'll show you that later in numbers. Do they do, or did they do, static and dynamic code analysis? I'm guessing that they weren't, because there's a very high chance that those issues, like out-of-bounds reads, would have been caught. Depends on the settings and so on. It was pointed out to me the other day. I was having a chat with a former colleague, worked at Cisco, and they do have static and dynamic code analysis in the pipeline. He says it's actually quite difficult, and these things are not perfect either, so it's easily possible that you could miss stuff. I appreciate that, but then if that is the case, still, if you get a CVE on one such issue, you need to get a couple of your junior developers hunting things, because you know that there's other legacy issues lurking in your code, and that, I think, is important. And the reason for that is that if your junior developers don't do that, or if you don't organize that internally, then the malicious actors will do it for you, because they know that you're not doing it. And that is a big problem. And we can know by the numbers that the vendors are not actually addressing things properly. So that means that the malicious actors know where to look. And that makes things a bit scary. Okay, so that's the thing. I'm pretty sure that CrowdStrike has not actually addressed the underlying issues, and I find that very concerning. I can't prove that, obviously, unless and until something else happens. I hope it doesn't, or until someone chucks the code into Ghidra and decompiles it and has a good look. You know, go forth and have fun with it. I haven't had a chance yet, so, you know, I also have a day job. Takes a bit more time, but it might be worthwhile. Okay, so that brings us to this, plugging the one hole versus actually fixing the sieve. You know, if you plug the one hole in the sieve, it doesn't actually prevent things from being ridiculously leaky and all the water coming through. That doesn't do much at all. And funnily enough, and this is not the first time, Microsoft Press actually has been leading the way in this long ago. So the book that is mentioned at the top of the slide is from Microsoft Press. Similarly, agile software development with Scrum, that was also a Microsoft Press book from long ago. They know how to do it, they just don't always do it. It's one of those things, but they produce very good insights. And it's definitely worth read. Now, okay, how many, you work for a variety of organizations, and you don't have to fess up to which ones. How many companies here use a pipeline that looks approximately like the one that's on the slide? Okay, that's some. How many of you work in companies who have a pipeline or no pipeline? Well, either no pipeline or pipeline that looks nothing like that. I don't know, but you don't want to fess up. Fair enough. As I said, don't worry, you can be anonymous. Yeah, these things are just really, really important. And one of the reasons I gave the CrowdStrike example is that former CrowdStrike employees actually reported that they didn't get enough time for testing. And that was kind of telling me way more than I needed to know. It shouldn't be them doing the testing. It should be the pipelines that are doing the primary testing. I'm not opposed to them doing testing as well, but if they're supposed to be spending lots more time, then there's a problem. So I latched onto that. And then I happened to know about another organization, and a former employee of that organization sits here in the room with us, mentioned to me that in their pipelines, the code analysis tests just did return 1, successful. It's faster, I'll admit, it's faster. It's also very much not good. So maybe they were under pressure for, releasing the software to the customers quickly, and this is one of the things that then happens. Business manager says something, doesn't understand the technical consequences, and the developers just do the best they can. But sometimes the best they can do is break fundamental rules of proper software development, and this is what happens, and it's dreadful. It's really, really not good. At some point, it's better to say no, and if the business doesn't want to be happy with that, you could walk. I realize that in the current environment that is more difficult, but in past years, I have walked away from companies that just didn't want to understand that sometimes things have to be done right. It's not unusual. And at the bottom, I have an example. Would you skip your pre-flight checks in an airplane just to get off the ground quicker? You wouldn't dream of it. That's just not going to happen. It will get you into an air crash investigation, but that's very bad for business. It's very bad for business in terms of PR, and that's the kind of thing that you don't want to be involved in. And the same happens to companies that develop software, develop equipment, and so on. They don't want the bad press, because that can actually destroy years of work on the market. Your relatively good name in the market. It's not a good thing. If your airstrip is in a forest fire, yeah, okay. Oh yeah. No, there's always exceptions. I do appreciate that, but as a general rule, I know we're nerds. We come up with exceptions. I get that, but I fully appreciate that, and there are always exceptions. But as a general thing, I'm talking about what should the normal pipeline include. It should include all these things, and in special cases, you might need to bypass something to put through a quick fix of something, but that trouble could happen, and you're right there sitting next to it to take action in case anything goes wrong with the deployment, you don't click the button and go home. That's just not what's going to happen. So now for my predictions. I didn't do a really broad one because it's too much information. So I picked a number of keywords, and then I had a look for those the top organizations that I had in the earlier graph. Oh, by the way, for those taking photos of my slides, you're most welcome to. I'm also happy to give you a PDF. If you give me either your email address or connect to me on LinkedIn or bring a USB, I'm happy to copy it for you, and then you've got all the slides. Yep. So, yeah, you're most welcome to get that from me. That's all cool. And it will be developed further, so being in touch with me might not be a bad idea. So I had a look at those top-ranked organizations, what actually is going on, and based on their past. So what has Juniper had in over the last 5 years? 249, so that's a real number rather than comparatively relative to the others. And what kind of stuff did it contain? Well, authentication, things checking, usually improper checking, injection, input validation. That's all a lot of the same, remote code execution, and so on. I'll skip to Cisco because it's really interesting. We know of the Firestarter CVEs from, was it last week or the week before? And I say that they were 100% predictable because what were they about? They were about input validation and authentication. Well, fancy that. And what is Cisco apparently famous for? In producing CVEs for exactly those things. That is what sticks out. That is typically the problem with Cisco. So if I want to find more issues with Cisco devices, I would attach an old one and I start fuzzing it. And I will find vulnerabilities. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And then let's hope that we, the researchers, do that before a malicious actor does that, because it is it's easy and cheap to get those devices online. You don't have to buy it new from Cisco, you just buy them from eBay. So, and you can prevent it from being imported into countries that you don't trust, but they can still buy it off eBay. So it just does work like that. And yeah, so each of these has substantial problems. Some do better than others, which is also nice to see, and some are substantially improving when you look at them over time. So now we can look at the snake oil again. What do they talk about in their communications, and how might these things be problematic? So that's the same group of people, and it's best if you just read it for yourself, and that's why I'm happy to give away slides, or you just take a photo. They talk about certain things, but if you actually analyze the pattern of the vulnerabilities and their communications, they're often talking around the issue rather than addressing the broader issues that are present in their companies. And that is a problem. Yeah, Mozilla is a bit of an exception. They are really, really trying to do better, and their recent activities together with Claude's, I forget the name of the thing. There's a Claude project to catch vulnerabilities. Who remembers the name? Mythos. Yeah, Claude Mythos. It found a couple of hundred extra vulnerabilities that are now fixed. That's really great. I'm not the world's greatest LLM fan, but they do have their uses, as long as you regard them as an LLM and a bright intern, and not as the oracle of all time AI, because they're definitely not. Okay, that's that. So how do you catch these things? You can tell in content and tone what the people are actually saying, and also by their actions. And that is also really telling. If they say one thing and then they do something else in the products, and meanwhile the CVEs keep flowing by, then you know they're actually not helping you. The equipment is just as bad as it was last year, and I think that's really, really unfortunate. And I think we have the right to demand better, because if an organization that builds equipment that is supposed to keep us safer is producing equipment that in fact comes up with issues that then make you very, very unsafe and more unsafe than you were before because you were relying on it and you had to rely on it, then that is a very serious issue. We all know in this room and far beyond that making closed source rather than open source doesn't actually make it more secure either, because that's obscurity and that is not how things are supposed to work. It's easy enough to use Ghidra anyway. It will disassemble, it will decompile, and you know, no secrets there, and even encrypted code can be decrypted even while the machine is running. A couple of pins on there and you're done. So it can be easily done. So to wrap up, is this. The shortcuts in the business processes are, in my opinion, actually the root cause of these issues. So it's not really a technical issue, but you can see what the consequences are in the technical issues, and you know, a bit of analysis of the CVEs made that quite clear to me, that we live in quite a dangerous position at the moment, and I'm hoping that more of us will start calling out the vendors for, in my opinion, the hideous work that some of them are doing. I think we need to do better, and I think they need to do better. Because, you know, if they're selling security products, we can hold them accountable for the lack of security that's in their products, right? That might be a nice way to phrase it. And then back to the arcane English, you know, the defense of the realm, whether it's your own organizational realm or or national security or European security, depends on it. And I live in Australia. We have to deal with the same thing inside Australia as well. Thank you. And these are other slides. Quick questions? Sure.
Do you think that language like Rust help making products more reliable, safe?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think they can, but not intrinsically so. It doesn't mean, so I don't think that writing an application in Rust solves all the problems, because you can still do terrible things in Rust. They will just look like Rust instead of like another language. However, Rust has a number of guardrails that can keep you out of certain troubles that, for instance, plain C just lets you do. If you have the right development rules inside your organization, you know, coding standards, you could make C or C++ as safe as Rust, but it's less likely. So I definitely think that a language like Rust can play a part, and I think that Mozilla has also benefited from, well, inventing Rust and then using it, replacing part of the C++ code, which a lot of which was actually really, really old code. I mean, some of their heritage goes back to Netscape Navigator, right? So replacing that with new Rust code is definitely a good idea. There are other projects, for instance, I think DNS servers being rewritten into Rust, all the old GNU command line tools getting rewritten from 1980s code to Rust. They could do with a rewrite. I've got a whole lot of talk on them. If you were here a year and a half ago, my research partner, Tobias Eckendorfer, did a talk here called Snakes in the Grass that contains some information about what happens in the GNU tools, and there's some hideous things in there, and a Rust equivalent would do much better. So I think that's a good thing, but just writing in Rust, you still need good development practices, otherwise it still goes wrong. You still need a good pipeline. Okay? I think that might be my time then.
Yeah, we had another question, but I think they can do.
Okay, it could be, yeah, I could just answer that one, and after that I can just, I'm here all day, and tomorrow morning you can catch me. You can recognize me by the blue hair, so. I'll put the coat away though. Yeah, sure.
No, it was trivia question for the whole room actually.
Oh, okay, well, we better have the whole room here then.
Okay, fine. They were filtered out because of your filtering. It said, I need a CV that's network approachable, right?
Yeah.
But the number one party for the past 3 years with submission of CVEs was not in your list. And I was wondering whether the rest of the room knows for the past 3 years which party, singular vendor, has reported the sheer amount most of CVEs ever.
Ah,
Yes.
I might not even know. Okay.
Sorry? I would guess Google. No, it's not Google, but they were not in the list. You're right. IBM/Red Hat? No. No. The Linux kernel project. They are very open about it.
Yeah.
Many of them are privesks, but
They-
many of them are not network
Yeah, so the reason they don't blip in my thing here is that they're spread across different organizations. A lot of them pop up at Red Hat, others pop up at SUSE, and it's actually difficult to figure out. Also, some pop up at other vendors that, like embedded devices that use Linux, but it's not, and so on. So they kind of fell out in the way that I was graphing things. I acknowledge that there is a lot of Linux in there, much more so than, for instance, FreeBSD, which only had like 10 vulnerabilities in the last year. No, seriously, they did. So, you know, kudos to FreeBSD and boo to Linux, because it had a
We
lot of stuff.
really
but
need to
yeah.
switch rooms in 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.